The secret behind the U.S. dollar, a piece of paper no longer backed by gold. But it is the most powerful tool of economic and geopolitical control in modern history. Have you ever wondered, why does the whole world have to use USD to buy oil and not another currency? Why do countries around the world have to reserve dollars when it is only the fiat currency of one nation? The answer lies in 3 historical agreements that turned the USD into a golden hoop, forcing all economies in the world to kneel. This was not luck. This was a deliberate manipulation strategy by a group called the Shadow Financial Elite. In this video, you will learn the mechanism that helped them turn USD into the ultimate weapon. And more importantly, who really operates this steel net, and why its survival is more important than war. The dominance of the USD did not begin after the war, but was conceived from a financial conspiracy in the early 20th century. The mysterious birth of the Fed, 1913, the private money printer. If one had to point to a milestone where American monetary power fell into the hands of the plutocrats, it would be the birth of the Federal Reserve Fed in 1913. Before 1913, the U.S. banking system was frequently rocked by financial crises. Although outwardly chaotic, economic historians suggest these crises were golden opportunities for financial tycoons like J.P. Morgan to acquire smaller banks on the cheap. However, they needed more systemic control rather than sporadic acquisitions. They needed a mechanism to centralize the power to print money without government interference. In November 1910, a group of powerful men secretly boarded a private train car to Jekyll Island, Georgia. They were figures representing the largest fortunes in America. Nelson Aldrich, Senator, representing the interests of the Rockefeller family. Frank Vanderlip, President of the National City Bank of New York, now Citibank. Paul Warburg, a German immigrant, considered the architect of the European-style central banking system. And representatives of the Morgan family, they drafted a plan to create a central bank. The key point, they created an agency that appeared public, overseen by the government, but had very strong private elements, especially through its member banks and the nominated board of governors. The crucial issue, giving the power to print money to an entity with private elements, meant the U.S. government would lose control over the money supply and would have to borrow money from these very banks and pay interest. This was the beginning of the elite's mechanism for endless profit from the national debt. The next turning point was after World War II. European and Asian countries were exhausted, while the U.S. had an economy untouched by destruction and possessed most of the world's gold reserves. The Bretton Woods Conference established the system. Other currencies were pegged to the USD fixed exchange rate. The USD was pegged to gold, $30 for 1 ounce of gold. This made the USD the global reserve currency and the official international payment medium. In this way, the American plutocrats turned the USD into a debt that the whole world had to bear. Nations were forced to hold USD to trade, indirectly accepting U.S. control over the global financial system. The Nixon shock, 1971, breaking the golden hoop. As the U.S. began to print money massively to finance the Vietnam War and social programs, the amount of USD in circulation far exceeded the gold reserves. Nations began to worry and demanded to exchange their USD reserves for gold. Facing the risk of the dollar losing its position, Nixon made a crucial decision, separating the USD from gold. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon unilaterally announced the end of the convertibility of USD to gold for foreign central banks. This decision was the absolute liberation for the financial elite. By removing gold, they gave the Fed and major banks the ability to print unlimited money, fiat money, without worrying about physical backing. Instead of collapsing, the USD's power was strengthened. This proved that gold was no longer the important thing, But the need to use USD was the ultimate weapon. The mechanism of power, exorbitant privilege, and the global hostage. After the USD was freed from gold, the American elite used this money-printing power to create two absolute advantages. First, the power to print money from nothing, financing all deficit spending. You ask, what is deficit spending and how does the USD finance it? Deficits and the motive for manipulation. So, what is a deficit? Simply, it's when the U.S. government spends more than it collects. Example, spending $4,000 billion but only collecting $3,000 billion in taxes, a deficit of $1,000 billion. Who is behind the deficit? The plutocrats. Through lobbying organizations, always push for policies of huge military spending beneficial to the defense corporations they own and tax cuts for the rich. Deficits are the inevitable result of these policies. So how does the USD create absolute power? This is the mechanism that makes the USD unique. For other nations, if the deficit is too large, the government must borrow. If it borrows too much in its local currency, it will devalue severely, inflation will explode, and no one will want to buy your debt anymore. But for the U.S., thanks to the USD, first, print money. The U.S. government issues treasury bonds to borrow the deficit amount. Next, absorb global debt. Because the USD is the global currency, other countries like China, Japan, oil-exporting nations earn trillions of USD from selling goods and oil to the U.S. and the world. Finally, forced to recycle dollars to maintain exchange rate stability and the ability to buy oil in USD, these countries are forced to use the USD they earn to buy back U.S. Treasury bonds, also known as dollar recycling. Example, imagine the U.S. buys $1 billion worth of goods from China. Instead of just holding that $1 billion which could devalue, China buys U.S. bonds. In other words, the world is lending money to the U.S. so the U.S. can continue its deficit spending and buy their own goods. The power to print USD allows the American elite to finance all deficit spending, export inflation globally, and force the world to pay for their economic and military expansion. Global financial control turning every nation into a hostage. How does the USD turn nations into hostages? It's through the link between the dollar and the payment system. SWIFT, the gateway of power. What is SWIFT? SWIFT is the global messaging and payment order network between banks. Most cross-border transactions go through it, with the USD as the dominant payment currency. The squeeze mechanism, control over the payment system and the USD, allows the American plutocrats to strip any nation of its ability to transact. Real-world example, weaponization. When the U.S. imposes sanctions on a country, e.g., Iran or Russia, they not only ban U.S. companies from trading, but can also threaten to cut that country's banks off from SWIFT and freeze USD transactions. This immediately strangles their economy, as they cannot sell goods or buy oil effectively. This is absolute power turning currency into a tool of war without firing a shot. Petrodollar pillar of the empire, the link between oil and absolute power. If the Fed provided the ability to print unlimited money, the petrodollar agreement provided the U.S. dollar with an indispensable demand worldwide, turning it into the only currency that every nation, friend or foe, must reserve. To ensure absolute power, the USD needed a new guarantor. After President Nixon ended the USD's convertibility to gold in 1970, the USD faced a major risk losing international trust. Nations began to worry about holding a currency that was just paper and could devalue at any time. The American financial elite understood they needed something more valuable than gold to peg the USD to that was oil. In 1973, the oil crisis erupted. Instead of letting the free market decide, U.S. leaders, especially National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger, a figure often considered by conspiracy theorists as representing the deep interests of the plutocrats, embarked on a bold geopolitical strategy. The goal was to force all global oil transactions to use the USD. Thus, the U.S. offered a fateful agreement with Saudi Arabia, 1974 to 1975. The U.S. reached a secret agreement with Saudi Arabia, the de facto leader of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC. This agreement was an ultimate exchange of power, with Saudi Arabia committing to only price and sell oil in USD. Any country wanting to buy oil must exchange their currency for USD, which is the enormous USD earned to buy U.S. Treasury bonds and U.S. financial assets. In return, the U.S. committed that it would provide military support and comprehensive security protection for the Saudi royal regime, supply advanced weapons and technology to Saudi Arabia. This agreement brought immense benefits to both and contributed to helping the dollar truly dominate the world. This agreement created artificial and indispensable demand for the USD, as oil is the lifeblood of every economy. This ensured the USD would always be the reserve currency, regardless of inflation in the U.S. Saudi Arabia's purchase of U.S. bonds guaranteed a huge, stable, and cheap source of lending for the U.S. government, indirectly financing budget deficits and military spending. From there, Wall Street banks, where the plutocrats control, became the managers and fee collectors from the reinvestment of these trillions of petrodollars. And the Saudi royals would be guaranteed the survival of the regime through the absolute military protection of the world superpower. To simplify, imagine. Oil is water. Every living thing needs water to live. USD is the only bucket. The American plutocrats say you can only get water with this USD bucket, and every nation must go find and hoard the USD bucket. When they find USD by selling goods, services to the U.S. or the world, they must put the USD into the U.S. banking system to reinvest, or keep it in reserves. This creates a perfect loop. USD is printed, goes out to buy oil, then returns to the U.S. financial system through the purchase of bonds. The plutocrats control both the beginning printing money and the end reinvestment. Defiance and consequences war to protect the dollar. From an economic researcher's perspective, protecting the petrodollar is the elite's red line. Any action aimed at breaking this system is seen as a direct threat to their power and must be eliminated with violence. We cannot ignore the shocking geopolitical events closely related to the devaluation of the petrodollar. First, the case of Iraq. Saddam Hussein. In 2000, Saddam Hussein decided to switch to selling oil in euros instead of USD. This was a public strategic move that, if successful, would encourage other countries to follow suit, severely damaging global demand for the USD. 3 years later, the U.S. launched the Iraq War in 2003, with the official reason being weapons of mass destruction. After overthrowing Saddam, one of the first moves of the Coalition Provisional Authority (CPA) was to immediately switch Iraq's oil transactions back to USD. So, was the war about protecting democracy? Or was it a brutal punishment by the plutocrats to protect the petrodollar and send a deterrent message, do not touch the oil agreement? Second, the case of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi. Around 2009 to 2011, Muammar Gaddafi Libya made efforts to pioneer the creation of an African gold dinar to pay for oil and transcontinental transactions. His goal was to free Africa from dependence on the USD and euro. In 2011, NATO intervened militarily, overthrowing and killing Gaddafi. Leaked documents later such as Hillary Clinton's emails when she was U.S. Secretary of State, indicated that Western leaders were concerned about Gaddafi's gold dinar plan and Libya's gold reserves. This reinforces the thesis that protecting monetary hegemony was the main motive behind these wars. Next, you will understand more about the plutocrats and the war industry. Who benefits directly from these wars? It is the weapons manufacturing corporations, E.G. Lockheed Martin, Boeing, that make enormous profits. Energy corporations that can control the supply and pricing of oil after the regime is overthrown. Wall Street banks. They finance the war through government bonds, lending, and managing reconstruction transactions. Therefore, the petrodollar is not just an economic agreement. It is a comprehensive control strategy, protected by military might, serving the ultimate interests of the financial elite and the industrial corporations they own. The true identity of the shadow manipulators and their motives. If the USD is the weapon, then who pulls the trigger? Real power does not lie in the White House or Congress, but in the hands of a discreetly operating group of people who have transferred power from traditional families to enormous financial institutions, controlling global capital flows. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, financial power was concentrated in banking families like the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, and Morgans. Today, that power has evolved, shifting to giant asset management corporations with the ability to cross-own almost the entire U.S. and world economy. The Big Three, the new owners of the world. They are BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. These three corporations are the largest asset management organizations on the planet, controlling total assets of tens of trillions of USD, surpassing the GDP of most countries. What is astonishing is that they not only manage assets, but are also the largest shareholders in almost every company in the S&P 500 index. Imagine they own large stakes in major banks, J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, technology corporations Apple, Google, media companies Disney, Fox, and most importantly, defense contractors and energy companies ExxonMobil. In this way, the Big Three have the ability to influence every decision from the corporate level to the economic and geopolitical policy level. When they own large stakes in both defense contractors and the banks financing war debt, their interests are fully served. The connection to the Fed and the government. This is the hottest point, the power to manipulate policy. Is it a coincidence that many senior advisors, Treasury officials, and even senior Fed leaders come from large banks like Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, or have close ties to BlackRock? The phenomenon of government officials and central bankers, after leaving office, being appointed to senior positions on Wall Street. This ensures that those who shape policy and those who benefit from policy are the same group of people. The Fed's decisions raising, lowering interest rates, quantitative easing, QE are not always in the interest of the people. They are often adjusted to maximize the transfer of wealth from the hands of the public to the hands of the plutocrats. QE rounds pumping money into the system push asset prices, stocks, real estate soaring, enriching those who hold assets, the elite, while the increase in the money supply reduces the purchasing power of cash wages, savings in the hands of ordinary people. The real motive, absolute profit and total control. The plutocrat's goal is not just money. Money is just a tool. The higher purpose is absolute control and creating risk-free profit. They profit from crises. Crises are for harvesting assets. Many researchers argue that financial crises are not accidents, but tools for purification and asset redistribution actively created by the elite. So how is crisis used as a tool by the plutocrats? The plutocrats will create a bubble E.G. The 2008 real estate bubble by easing credit, increasing the money supply to the market, reducing bank reserve ratios and lowering lending standards, reducing lending interest rates, simplifying loan standards. When the bubble bursts, their banks and corporations are bailed out by the government and the Fed. At the same time, they use their huge cash reserves to acquire cheap assets, houses, bankrupt businesses from the hands of the people and small businesses that defaulted. Maintaining the USD's position, the key to power. The existence of the USD is vital for the plutocrats' business model because they hold gold. The USD is the tool that allows them to print money without being punished by severe inflation. They control debt. The USD maintains the global debt loop through the petrodollar, forcing the world to finance their spending and wealth. Summary of absolute power. The American financial elite have built a perfect system. They create money through the Fed. They force the world to use that money through the petrodollar. They reap huge profits from transacting and reinvesting that money through Wall Street. They punish anyone who challenges the system through military and SWIFT. And they redistribute assets into their own hands through crises, through market manipulation. This is the undeniable nature of the dominance behind the US dollar. The dawn of a new control, the future and the plutocrats' secret plan. The dominance of the US dollar, however strong, is not eternal. The shadow financial elite, who built and control this system, are not asleep. They are always one step ahead, preparing for the worst-case scenario, the collapse or decline of the USD. This part will explore the current threats to the USD and the most controversial power transition scenario being prepared by the elite, the Great Reset, through central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. The current threat, the de-dollarization movement. After decades of enduring exorbitant privilege and being weaponized by sanctions, many large nations have begun to find ways to escape the USD's grip. The rise of BRICS and local currency trade. BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. This bloc is striving to create a common currency or a non-USD payment mechanism for internal transactions. China and Russia have increased the use of the yuan and ruble to pay for oil and goods. Real-world example. India, a major partner, has begun buying Russian crude oil in currencies other than the USD. Although this ratio is not yet a majority, it is the first crack in the petrodollar wall. If nations do not need to hold USD to buy oil or trade, the demand for the USD will plummet. Trillions of USD circulating outside the US will flood back into the US market and cause an extremely serious consequence. The US will face collapse. The post-USD crisis scenario. If the USD loses its reserve status, hyperinflation, the huge amount of money returning will create a terrible wave of hyperinflation in the US, severely reducing purchasing power and wiping out the middle class's savings. Debt market collapse. Demand for US Treasury bonds drops, forcing the US government to raise interest rates to attract investors. This will cause debt servicing costs to skyrocket, pushing the US to the brink of default, dragging the entire global financial system down with it. Therefore, a secret plan of the plutocrats has emerged. The Great Reset and CBDCs. The financial elite, especially the big three BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and their advisors cannot let the collapse happen chaotically. They need a controlled transfer of power. This is where central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, emerge as a new generation control tool. What are CBDCs? Easy definition. CBDCs are digital money issued directly by the central bank, the Fed. Essentially, it will replace cash and your current commercial bank deposits. Why do the elite favor them? First, CBDCs allow the Fed and related agencies to track your every transaction in real time. There will be no more financial privacy. This is absolute control. Second, direct policy implementation. The Fed can apply negative interest rates directly to your account, forcing you to spend instead of save. They can impose expiration dates on money, forcing you to spend it within a certain time frame. Third, programmable money. This is the scariest aspect. Money can be programmed to only be used for specific purposes. Example, social welfare. Money could be programmed to only buy food, not be used for gasoline or products deemed unhealthy. This gives the elite the power to control the public's consumption behavior. The Great Reset, replacing the chains. Many analysts argue that the Great Reset is not a random idea, but a plan for the financial elite to transfer power to a new management model. When the USD faces a crisis inflation, devaluation, the elite will propose CBDCs as the saving solution for stability. By accepting CBDCs, the public will voluntarily trade financial freedom for artificial stability. The plutocrats do not care what the currency is called USD, gold, or CBDC. Their goal is to control the mechanism of money issuance and circulation. CBDCs, with their ability to track and program, are a more sophisticated and effective control tool than any physical monetary system that has ever existed. The battle for monetary power is still ongoing. It is not a war between the U.S. and China, but a war between the financial elite, who want maximum control, and the public who want personal and financial freedom. The U.S. dollar is just the bucket in the petrodollar system. CBDCs are the surveillance cameras in the future control system. Although the tools may change, the plutocrats' motive for manipulation remains unchanged: control capital flows, reap absolute profits, and maintain ultimate power. We have together peeled back the story of the dollar, from the shady birth of the Fed, to the brutal dominance of the petrodollar, to the identity of those behind it, the Big Three, and finally, the plan to transition to CBDCs. This analysis shows you the USD is not just an economic symbol, but a chronicle of manipulation. It is a warning about the depth to which shadow power can shape the destiny of the entire world. So are you ready for the truth? Will you accept total control through digital currency, or will you seek financial freedom solutions for yourself?